Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of the Rogue Deck Chronicles. I am Dean, and with me, I have Devin.
Hey everybody, hopefully everyone had a good weekend. I know a lot of people got to enjoy Journey Together for the first time. I know a lot more people were not able to enjoy Journey Together for the first time this weekend. So it's interesting depending on how you take this weekend, if it was good or for bad.
And then there's some people that kind of enjoyed Journey Together, but not the actual cards, like me.
So
I
I'm
made
guessing
proxies of everything.
proxies, and I'm assuming you played a little bit on live because of our live
A little
event.
bit, yeah. Only 2 decks as of right now, just because one was the Rogue Deck of the Week, which we'll talk about later on in the episode. And then I'm trying to see what deck I'm going to be shifting to with the new format.
Mm-hmm.
All the decks I play are all rotating, so I really need to find a brand new deck. I can't even really transition. I'm like, oh, I'll just use something that I've been with. I physically can't. The 2 decks that I played this weekend are both like gone by Atlanta. So I'm like, okay, I'm starting from square one.
Yeah, and that's the beauty of rotation, right? A lot of archetypes get completely just rotated out and pushed out. There's with a new set coming in, there's new archetypes being completely born out of nothing, and then there's sets and archetypes that are going to have to adjust very quickly or kind of grow into the new format. So I think you're not the only player dealing with those issues, and I
Oh
think it's
no.
up to the player to figure out how they want to adjust to that for sure.
Yeah, and obviously I probably would have started sooner if I was able to attend pre-release events and concentrate on if I was like going to Atlanta. But just I had other priorities, so I have some time to really make this adjustment. I just found out that one of my local for the challenges I thought it would be before rotation, and it's actually going to be during post rotation. So I have a little bit of pressure of trying to find another deck, which I think I found one where I have I think majority of the cards because they don't. Then this deck doesn't play anything from Journey Together.
Okay.
So I'm still play testing it. It was a deck that I was actually messaging you about. I really like it. So we'll see if I make that switch or if I go to something else, or I may even just staff and judge that week that tournament. We'll see.
Gotcha.
But before we go on, I just want to say a huge thank you to everyone that joined us for our first live stream with the Journey Together playtesting with me and Joe. I know we didn't have a huge turnout, but it means a lot to us that you would spend your Friday evening watching us play Pokemon and miss playing and just having a good old time. We're looking to do something similar in the future. We may do something monthly, not necessarily doing play testing of a certain format. We may mix it up. I know some people were asking and see if we can do like GLC, or we may do some alternative formats. But we do want to start doing this on a kind of regular basis. We don't know what the schedule will look like, but it seems like a lot of y'all really enjoyed it, and we really appreciate that. I know Devin, you were there in the chat for a little bit.
Yeah, I was there for
So, what
about
was your
over.
experience of it?
I mean, I've watched tabletops before, and I know you and Joe very well, so I was able to kind of like just throw barbs and kind of just like mess with you guys a little bit. But watching you guys play test the decks was very interesting. It's so funny because I gave you one of the deck lists, and I'm sitting there I'm like, I don't think you're playing it right. I'm sitting at home being like, you're definitely not playing the way I would have played the turn, and because I could kind of see your hands. That was the beauty of like the chat's viewpoint was we could kind of see what you guys are thinking of, and we can see what you guys are actually doing. So that was the interesting part where it's just this new format we talked about, this new set, new format, new everything. There's so many things that you're kind of trying to learn and relearn and kind of figuring it out. And sessions
Hmm.
like that really show like the process of getting a getting a deck together for when you want to attend those challenges and those cups for those CP earning events. Like you have to have sessions like you and Joe had last Friday where it's like, all right, it's gonna go 3.5 hours and we're just gonna play like maybe 3 or 4 matches. And we're gonna see what we get out of it and then kind of reflect on it from there.
Yeah, and during that session, like if you saw, I was showing Joe my hand. I didn't care. This was just for fun.
Mm-hmm.
We were both learning new decks, and we just wanted to show y'all some new. All of them actually were all new decks from Journey together. We didn't really play anything that was like old and that carried over. I know Joe kind of played that Archaldon deck, but with a new flair with the Hops Zacian and the Hops Mechanic. But yeah, we just wanted to show y'all some new decks. I went more in the rogue style versus Joe wanted to show off the trainers. But yeah, it was fun. I really enjoyed it. Uh, I will say I brought a deck that was like kind of a last minute throw together. Wouldn't recommend it, but it was kind of fun to play once you kind of got in the groove of it. But yes, thank you for coming out. We will do this again in the future. We'll figure out a better. We may. We're going to take this experience. We're going to grow from it. We're going to take the criticisms, and we'll try to have a better production next time. Even though it was a lot of fun just playing Pokemon for 4 hours with my good friend, and yeah, I just want to say all thank you for doing that or for joining us on that. And if you have any critiques, let us know. Um, in regards to deck lists, I will say the trainer decks that Joe played are more on the traditional side. So you can probably just go on any website and try to find those deck lists. Um,
I'm sure
one
he
of the decks I
probably.
play, go ahead.
I would say I'm sure he probably just went on Limitless and just found a list from Japan and copied it, or even just
Yeah, that's
Googled it or YouTubed it. It doesn't seem like he went too far and tried to make anything crazy. But again, this new set, the Journey Together, was all about those trainers Pokemon. So it was a really good opportunity to showcase the theme of the set, which I think he did a really good job doing that with his lists.
absolutely. I know we didn't really show lilies as much, but those cards are more support cards.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't really seen a Lily's deck other than maybe like there is a Lily's Clefairy deck out there, but maybe that's something we can look into later. With the decks I played, one deck, the Mammoth deck, I'm I'm actually kind of switching that up after playing it and doing some more research on what's out there. I'm actually going to change up some of the Pokemon. So I just took it from a city league somewhere. I've just found a list. I'm like, oh, I have most of these cards. And then one deck is actually going to be mentioned later on in this episode. So stay tuned on that one. And then my status condition deck, don't worry about that one, y'all.
That one was a.
That was me like, oh, I need a third deck. What can I do? And that I thought this looked interesting. It needs a lot of tinkering with, so I'm
Yeah.
not even gonna put that out there for y'all listeners. Just ignore that deck for now.
So I mean, like I said, it looked like you guys had fun. It was kind of fun that, and I mean, I didn't stay the whole time. Like I kind of fell asleep after a long work day, but I was there for a little bit, and it was definitely a good tabletop session. It kind of, again, it's the peeling the curtain, pulling back the curtain of what a testing session is for a lot of us as players, in terms of fine tuning decks and looking at the strengths and weaknesses of decks. There's definitely decks out there that during your matches you guys did proof of concepts, and then the rest of it kind of was like, all right, can I get the rest of the work? And there's other
Mhm.
decks that just work the way these were because they've been tested by other players, and you guys were just showing off what the themes were. So definitely a good
Yeah,
experience in terms of showing how players test and learn decks.
yeah, and with with that topic actually, I know you and me were thinking about like what to do next since we finished the deck building series of how to train a rogue.
Mm-hmm.
And I think going forward, starting with this week's episode, we're going to start a new series, and we'll go into that later on in the episode. But now we learned how to make a deck. We're now going to start talking about like how to become a better trainer. So now we have the deck we made. What do we do with this? How do we prepare ourselves to go to these tournaments, go to our casual nights, and really be the best trainer we can be? We got the tools. How can we use them? And we'll talk about that later on. But before that, some maybe quick video game news because yeah, we're a trading card podcast, but a lot of the trading cards come from the video games. And last week they dropped some info for the new Legends game in the Nintendo Direct. So we can briefly touch on that, see what do you think that will impact the trading card game, and then we'll go on talking about the major regional that happened in Australia, and then we'll talk about the new series we're going to go on. So Devin, you're really the video game person
Yeah.
between you and me. I play super casually. You play a little more than me. So kind of give a brief summary about the news that dropped with Pokemon's Legends Z to A.
All right, so the Elemental Monkeys are in the Switch game. Okay,
We
you
know
don't.
two of them are.
No, all three of them are. All three of them have been confirmed. But
Okay.
I figured that I'm being a little facetious. I'm a shiny hunter outside of playing the trading card game, and I need the Elemental Monkeys, and you can't get them on the Switch game until now. Um, to really round out into that though, this game has added Pokemon that hasn't been put onto a Switch title since Pokemon transitioned away from the 3DS DS era. So every single Pokemon now with this game is going to be obtainable through a Switch title, so you won't need Go. So I think that is important. We're talking about Furfuru, we're talking about the three elemental monkeys, and we're talking about Patrat. Those
Yeah.
were the last ones that players, especially shiny hunters, were kind of griping for. And as a shiny hunter, that was my excitement. But in terms of the actual trailer itself and the gameplay itself, we got more of the understanding of what the potential story of the game could be, where there is a interesting day-night cycle in the game, where at day you'll be able to do certain activities, at night another set of activities kind of open up, and there's kind of like a two different plots you have to manage based on the time of day, which is going to be super interesting. There's a new ranking system. So it's going to be very interesting on the day-night cycle. So the day is more catch related, almost very similar to Legends Arceus, where the night is battle related, where if a battle ranking, internal ranking system. So like you'll be fighting different level trainers, um, and then the more you win, the higher your rank, and at the end of the day, you get to the A rank and the super ranks, and you get this. I guess the plot is the highest ranked trainer gets our wish fulfilled, but we don't know what that really means. But it's interesting that they're focusing on battling. So I would venture to say that the harder battles toward the end of the story are going to be against more competitively bred Pokemon, very similar like the E4 and the champion in BDSP were. So that was really the biggest thing from the trailer.
Yeah. I know they really focus on the battling and really the Z to A portion of you start in rank Z and go all the way to rank A. So I thought that was very interesting. And trying to connect it to the trading card game, I'm wondering how they're gonna do this day to night thing that you talked about. Like at daytime, it's all about the capturing the Pokemon. Nighttime is about the battling. And remind me, maybe we may get a stadium similar to Parallel City, where it has two effects depending on which direction it's pointing to. So I'm
Yes.
wondering if they may take a risk and do something similar. That would be very interesting.
Well, they've done that
Um,
stadium more than just Parallel City. Parallel City is just the more famous of the examples. I think they did like three or four of those stadiums where it was a double-sided stadium, and each side had a different effect. And I think the Wild Zone Stadium having a night and a day kind of art would be really cool. I think calling having a night and day Lumia City would be interesting, and then whatever other
mhm,
areas are in the game, like we only know that so far. So I think that might be a mechanic they might want to introduce on one or two cards. Obviously, with the game and having megas are coming back to the trading card game, and maybe
mhm.
with the teasing of, we obviously know certain megas are coming back. We saw it in the trailer. Certain megas are coming back, but what new megas do we get from the game itself? That will be obviously added to the trading card game if we get a new mega or a new regional variant or something like that. So I think it's to be determined what we will see. It's definitely going to be added to the trading card game. We just don't know enough to know what could be added.
Yeah, all we can really do is speculate. I know there's been some leaks about all the new megas.
Yeah, I've seen those.
I try to stay away from that one because I don't want to say, oh, this, and this is going to happen, and all of a sudden it doesn't. We can't really trust a lot of the sources.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I have seen a list, and a lot of them are interesting. Um, I'm very interested in see if we're going to do any basic mega Pokemon because there are some.
Yes.
I wonder how that will work compared to right now. We have a stage one with Lucario confirmed and stage two with Gardevoir confirmed. So I'm wondering how we'll see the balance of the HP and power level. Like, will the basics still be three prizes while the stage one, stage two, or three prizes? Like, how will that all balance? So later this year we'll see that, or into 2026. But yeah, Pokemon ZA, we got finally more info as we're getting closer and closer to the release date.
Well, closer and closer is relative. We're probably not going to get into the holiday season of 2025, so we have plenty of time.
Yeah, true. So with that video game news, let's move on to regional news,
Yep.
as in tournaments. So this past weekend we had our last regional, I believe,
Yes.
I'm not,
Last.
for this format with Brilliant Stars to Prismatic Evolutions, and this happened in Brisbane, Australia.
Yeah. Honestly, I forgot the tournament was even happening. And it was mostly because I just had a very lazy weekend. I really didn't do much. But when I was like, oh, there was a tournament, and it's one of those situations where this tournament counts, but the information we take from it really can't be used too much.
Yeah.
So
I will say this. It was a decent sized tournament for Australia standards. It was where is it?
470 players, which is still a big event.
Yeah, especially for Australia. They usually have like 300, so getting closer to the 500 range is really cool. And then just seeing a like more international flair in the results as you see in the day two. Yes, majority Australians did comprise of the day two, but you'll see a couple of Japanese players, a couple of American players. In the top 32, there's someone from Denmark that did pretty well. You see some more in the South Pacific. You see Taiwan, Indonesia, Singapore, the countries that are closer to Australia.
Mm-hmm.
Someone from South Africa came out for it. So it was really cool to see how now even the Australian regionals are getting more and more people visiting and competing and trying to get their slot for Worlds.
Yeah.
Obviously, I would say maybe a third, or no, probably less than that, probably a fifth of the players that made day two. None of these points matter for them. They have to win the tournament because they're not part of the TPCI structure.
Yeah, because all the Japanese players, the only way they would get their world's invite would be via a win because of how they have either they qualify that way or they have to go through the Japanese grind cycle. So yeah, I mean, it's one of those situations where we've been seeing more and more bleed through, especially in the Oceania region from the Japanese region in terms of players. Obviously, we've been seeing Japanese players play in Europe and the United States regionals and stuff like that, but this was really much of a cheaper trip for them comparatively. And this being the last tournament of a format, I think some players went to try to steal a bid, I guess, because this was a tournament format that some players are kind of just taking the week off because it is, again, a last
Mm-hmm.
before. But I know there was some players, I know you know someone who actually went to this tournament and just used it as an excuse to just travel the world. So there's always different reasons for traveling to these different events. Everyone has their motivators, and it was very interesting. Like you said, a lot of the players in the day two were Australian, obviously, but there's also a good mix of international flavor with the day two. Out of the 81 or so people, not every single person was Australian, which is always good to see in terms of tournament representation and kind of the blending of the regions on these scale of events.
Yeah, and speaking of this event, let's take a look at who won, what did well. So the winner of the Brisbane Regional was none other than a Maridon deck piloted by Gabriel Smart, who is one of the top TCG players from the North American region. And taking a look at his list, honestly, it's more or less a standard Maridon list. I'm not really seeing anything interesting. I see a Defiance Man. I'm not sure if that's new or not.
I mean,
But
I
yeah.
don't know the archetype enough, but it's one of those. It doesn't look like he went too crazy into anything. Like he kind of went very safe and standard, which is fine. I mean, to be quite honest with you, this was probably this version of the deck's last ride. There's so many V Pokemon in there, and
Hmm.
some obviously like the Suing Heavy Ball, and there's a whole bunch of rotating cards. Like Maridon's going to have to it's going to have to find a refocusing with new buddies, which I think Maridon's going to be able to very easily. Don't get me wrong. Um, but it's one of those. This was a last ride tournament for Maridon, and it got
Hmm.
the win.
Yeah, and don't blame them. Rhydon's always been a consistent deck. It's really one of those decks that thrives when no one expects it.
Mm-hmm.
So it won Puerto Rico, and then it didn't really make an appearance until now. So a lot of people are like, okay, Maridon, it's there, whatever. And then all of a sudden it comes back and wins. And now with this information, you can't really do much with it. Like we don't know what Atlanta is going to be like. So like you said, this is last try for a lot of decks. Lugia came up and got third place. There was another Maridon in Top Cut, I believe, as well. I believe they did a top
Yeah,
10 or top 12, or
yeah. I mean, it
I
was
believe it was
nice.
a top 12 if I wasn't mistaken. But there wasn't really a lot of info when it comes to these Australian regionals. We know they happen, and if people post about it on Twitter, that's really all the information we get, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, you and I were looking at the kind of the day two. We were kind of scrolling through, and it's very much a who's who of meta in the format it was in. Right. That's
Hmm.
so, but there's a lot of these decks here that we're seeing that this is the last time we're going to be seeing these decks pretty much ever. Like
Hmm.
Raikou, like Maridon's going to have to be reshifted very drastically. Lugia Archeops just completely goes away. Um, Cloth is definitely taking a step back. So,
Yeah, it's that deck is done after this weekend.
and then
Uh,
Gardevoir is going to have to reshift itself because it does lose some major pieces. So it's going to be very interesting. Like I was looking through it and I almost missed it. There's only really two decks that people would consider rogue that made day two.
hmm.
One of them was this the Arceus Armarouge, kind of the fire Arceus archetype, which I know you've been a very big fan of
Yeah, I actually played
lately.
it last Thursday at my challenge and won the challenge with it.
Yeah,
So
it got
it's a very powerful deck when played properly. Arceus was a big victim of power creep. It just couldn't keep up with the power damage.
mhm.
With only hitting 180 to 200 every single turn, and other decks just can OHKO it so easily. But I'm glad that two players were able to make day two with it, with one getting top 64 at 38th place or 36th place. So that was one deck, and the other deck was one that you've never even seen before.
Yeah, you were telling me about this in an unrelated conversation earlier today, and then I'm like, oh, look, I recognize this now. And it was,
Yeah, so it's the Slow King deck.
which is interesting. Like, I was looking over it, and I'm like, what does it do? You're telling me, I'm like, oh. And for those who don't know, the Slow King is a card from Stellar Crown. It is a Stage 1 Psychic Pokemon with the attack Seek Inspiration, so it's a Psychic Colorless. And it says discard the top card of your deck. And if that card is a Pokemon that doesn't have a rule box, choose one of its attacks and use it as this attack. And then defines what a rule box Pokemon is. So for 2 energy, you can copy any of your Pokemon's attacks as long as they're on the top of the discard pile or at the top of your deck. So
Mm-hmm.
it's very interesting. So it's really a lot of top deck manipulation in getting what you need. Like the list of Pokemon they use is like the Kyurem from Shrouded Fables with a Trifrost attack. The was it the Crobat from Silver Tempest, which is going to rotate with the Critical Bite attack, where you can just do 30 to 1 of your opponent's damage. And if that Pokemon is knocked out by this damage, you take 2 more prize cards. So you can take up to 3 prize cards, or even 4 if it's a finishing move.
Mm-hmm.
The Annihilate from Surging Strikes or Surging Sparks that has Destined Fight. Just knock out both Pokemon, and obviously if you're knocking out a V Star or V or an EX, you're just taking that's a plus prize trade. And then the Conkeldurr from Twilight Masquerade, we're just doing 250. Like
Yep.
that's attack. If it's a Pokemon affected by a special condition, ignore all energy and the attack cost. That means nothing when you're doing the Seek Inspiration attack. So it's interesting. Like when you told me about it, I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Now I'm reading into it. I'm like, whoa, it's a very high skill ceiling deck for sure, but it can pop off.
Yeah, and really, we see this becoming more popular once post rotation. So I wouldn't be surprised to see this on the graph at Atlanta, because this has been all over the place in Japan. It's kind of like the Froggator deck. It did really well, and it just hasn't made the transition over to the TPCI region just yet, because Manaphy is an important card that blocks this deck, especially with the Kyurem. Once Manaphy rotates, this deck is going to go wild. And it's a very low to the ground, very cheap deck to build too.
Yeah, it's like 40 bucks.
Yeah, $40. And really, if you're a competitive player, you will have a lot of these cards. The only cards you probably won't have are some of the Pokemon, which are the cheapest part of the list. Like the most expensive card in this list is the Pheasantipity.
Yeah.
Which you should probably have 2 or 3 copies at this point anyway, if you've been in the game since it came out.
It reminds me of a binder dump deck. Like if you didn't know any better, you just thought someone just dumped their binder into the deck and said this will work.
But yeah, but when you look at this deck even in closer detail, these cards were picked for certain reasons.
Yeah.
So whether you want to hit hard or do the spread damage with the Kyurem or get the manipulate the prize trade with Crobat, it has a certain strategy of when you use a certain card and when.
Yeah.
And playing 4 Academy at night makes that strategy so much easier.
Yeah, no, definitely. And like I was reading the cards, I'm like, holy crap. this is bonkers. But again, it definitely does feel like a high skill ceiling deck. So this is a deck that if you're not very, very confident in certain aspects of the gameplay, I would say play with this deck and you'll get better in those areas. And we'll talk about what that means, like some of the areas in a minute.
Yeah, absolutely. But in summary, same old decks did well at another major event. Some had their swan song. Some we will see in a different light in 2 weeks in Atlanta. But yeah, just another regional in the books. But with having one regional this past weekend, we have one coming up this weekend in Japan, being the Champions League in Miyagi, I believe.
Yeah.
And this one is in kind of a similar format that we'll see in Atlanta, but they have the Heat Wave Arena cards legal.
Yeah, so they'll be about a half a set ahead.
Yeah. So with that, the only big difference is the Ethan cards, Cynthia cards, Steven and Marnie cards are legal for play. I'm not sure how that impacts their format. I've been kind of taking a peek at what's been doing well in city leagues. I see a lot of Typhlosion and a lot of the Ethan cards doing well.
Uh,
Not so much of the other trainers, but
the Cynthia
they
deck
still
did well. Cynthia's Garchomp did well. I saw a couple
okay.
of results with that. It looks like the biggest deck in that format right now is actually Raging Bolt.
Yeah, I looked at one of the city leagues, and the top 8 decks were just Raging Bolt.
Yeah. So I think Raging Bolt either I don't know what made Raging Bolt so good for that format. I need to look into the list to be a little more understanding of it, but there's a lot of similarities for what we'll see in Atlanta. I think the Heatwave Arena is going to make some archetypes a little stronger than others. So take that information for those who are preparing for the Atlanta Regional with a grain of salt. I would definitely look at the deck lists and results of the city leagues and stuff from like maybe 3 4 weeks ago as more of a okay, this is an apples to apples comparison,
Hmm.
but it still gives you an idea of what is gaining popularity and gaining traction because the Heatwave Arena that sets will come over here in 2 months time from time of recording, so it's not so far in the future that you should ignore it. But if you're preparing for Atlanta, I would definitely not take those results especially seriously unless you are looking to see and play Raging Bolt.
I would say see if you can watch some of the gameplay of any deck that we may expect for Atlanta, just so you can see how it works. Granted, I'm sure the players are practicing, getting used to it themselves, but seeing someone else, especially in a different region, they may see the deck in a different light than we can. So, like Raging Bolt, the Slow King deck, any of the trainers from Journey Together decks, I will watch them, see how they play the deck, and take notes and see like, okay, maybe they're doing something I'm not seeing, or maybe their sequencing's a little different. I think doing a big tournament like that is a good VOD practice as well. Yes, you may see decks that we can't play yet, but focus on the cards that we have right now, and hopefully, and I'm sure there'll be plenty of those type of decks out there that are going to be on the stream because they do stream these Japanese tournaments. We just have to find the resources for it. I'm sure a lot of the YouTube creators out there will restream it. I know there's a couple that I follow that will do it. So we'll see how this Champions League fares out and how we can take that information and apply it to our first regional in Atlanta in a couple weeks.
Mm-hmm.
But with that, we talked about major events. We talked about some news. I think it's time to go into our new series that you and me have been planning for the last couple weeks on. What do you think?
Yeah, and I think the stream on Friday, like after you were done streaming, I think I talked to you on Saturday afterwards, and I go, you know what? We couldn't have timed the next couple of episodes better, especially after a good playtesting session. So
Exactly.
I think it just pure happenstance it came in that way. You wanted to do that playtesting stream, highlighted some things because the one thing that when I like I said I was watching from the chat, I was watching you guys kind of play. You're talking about yeah we misplayed, yes we did this. I'm like wow, I look at a deck very differently than you, and that would affect what we want to talk about today, which is sequencing. So we want to go into a little mini series on how to kind of get better with the actual playing of decks now that we've built the decks and talking about understanding the order of operations when it comes to a turn, when it comes to
Mm-hmm.
stringing your turns together, but also mastering what the deck that you are picking can do. You're optimizing that deck really because building the deck is great. But when you get into the next phase, which we're going to talk about over the next 2 to 3 weeks, that's where you really get to find the true potential of the deck. And I think understanding the sequence of the deck is always the first thing I look at.
Yeah. And I think with the decks that we played, it really shows sequencing in a very good light. I will say sequencing is probably one of my weaker areas. I've that's why I tend to go in more linear fashion decks. Granted, I've been playing Claw for a while, and sequencing in that deck is actually very crucial, but it goes with how much practice and your comfortability with the deck, and you can see your lines, and that affects how you do your sequencing as well. Like, obviously, when you pick up a brand new deck, you don't know the lines that, at least that often or that clear. So it does affect like how you play different things in certain operations and certain orders. And then as you play more and more and more with the deck, you just find that your sequencing and order operations become more fluid and almost second nature.
Yeah.
Um, I think a good example is going to be our rogue deck of the week.
Yes.
That was one of the decks I picked up, and obviously I saw a play that you did not, and I was focusing on how to play a deck in one way, and that impacted the sequencing that I did for the deck. And then I'm seeing you in the chat like, why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do that? And it made me realize, oh yeah, I should have done my order differently, my sequencing differently.
Yeah.
So,
And,
Devin, before we even go further in this conversation, why don't you just give us a brief definition and explain what sequencing means in the Pokemon trading card game?
yeah, and obviously this isn't an exact definition. Everyone kind of has a general idea, general difference, like what they would say sequencing is. But for me, when you say sequence, it is the order of which you do your moves and how those moves connect to each other from draw phase to whatever is ending your turn phase. So that could be the attack phase or it could be the pass phase. So in order to really emphasize or even talk about what a sequence of a turn is when you're going through your movements, when you're going through your actions of each part of that turn, how does that affect the next move and the next move and the next move, all within the same turn? We're not talking turn one, turn two, turn three, not that type of sequence. We're talking in the middle of your first turn. What cards in what order should you do in order to maximize the efficiency of the deck to get you the best results possible? So, in I'm going to use Pocket because it's a very simple example. In Pocket, you typically want a Pokeball first, and then you want a Professor Research. Get the card out, and then draw two more. Because that can affect, one, it thins your deck out. And two, you get more optimization, you get to expose more cards from the deck. And that's really what sequencing can do, because when you sequence efficiently, you get to see the most amount of cards possible.
Yeah, and I know on Thursday before we were doing our challenge, I was seeing a couple of my friends play test each other, and they were doing some stuff, and I'm just observing. And in the middle, I just pause. I'm like, "Hey, can I help them with some sequencing stuff?" And he was like, "Yeah, go for it. Let's teach him how to use his deck better." And I show him like you should do A, B, and C. And he was doing something to where um what he was doing was correct. I just helped him do something more correct to get to his end goal in a more efficient way. And I help him draw and see more of his deck to
Mm-hmm.
where he ended up actually attacking going that direction versus where the directions he was heading. He was having a fine turn, don't get me wrong, but he was going to be short of attacking. And it depends on and obviously it depends what's in your hand. You can only do based on what's on your board in your hand and the limitations set to that.
Mm-hmm.
But if you can, like say, Ultra Ball away your hand, you can either fail a search or get something in your hand where you're going to be minus a card. That way you can use Muse Restart for one, and then use Phesandipity's Flip the Script to grab three more. Versus if you did Flip the Script, well, your hand's more than three, you can't use Muse Restart,
Yes.
or you can't use like another way of seeing more cards, because obviously the more cards you see, the more options you're given in your turn. So, and that's just a basic example, like drawing and those type of mechanics. Probably the easiest way to talk about sequencing,
Mm-hmm.
but a lot of it's also the choice on how to do different abilities and or like item actions as well.
Yes. Another good example of sequencing efficiently. maybe not correctly, but efficiently would be if you have a hand where you have like a good. I'm going to use the example. You have 4 cards in hand. One of them is a Professor Research. You have an Ultra Ball, and then 2 dead cards in your hand. Well, you could just research and then draw 7 new cards, or you could Ultra Ball the 2 useless cards out of your hand because they're going to go to the discard pile anyway with the research.
Mm-hmm.
Search your deck, pull a card that either you can put onto your board, or just pull a card out of your deck that's going to go into the discard pile because it's a dead card in the matchup.
Mm-hmm.
And then research for 7 new cards. Now you just then your card of 1 deck. You were able to look into your deck and get that private deck knowledge if you haven't been able to deck search yet. And then you ended up accomplishing the same thing. You ended up drawing 7 fresh cards and getting all the cards from your hand to your discard pile. But you were able to look at just a little bit more information. You're able to dig 1 extra card deeper because you use that Ultra Ball to gain 1 more card. And then you have 7 more new cards, and you can just do more actions and thin out and move your board a little bit toward a win condition that the deck is designed for, but also trying to hit your synergistic pieces to where if your dead cards are in your discard pile, you are in a better spot because then they're not in the hand clogging up your hand and clogging up your options. So that's where that efficiency goes into play because you accomplished pretty much the same thing, but you gained more out of it by just doing those extra steps.
Yeah, exactly. And developing this skill just it helps you become a better trainer. It helps you see more lines, see more outs in whenever you play your games that you may not be able to originally see. And a lot of it comes with comfortability of the deck. Play your deck over and over again. Do those play testing sessions like you saw in the live stream, and just keep playing the same deck. Like, don't put a deck down. I know a lot of people love like, oh, I'm gonna play this for 2 games and I'll switch to a new deck. If you're looking to do the competitive side of Pokemon, it's really important to practice the same deck over and over again. And I would say not even if you're going to play that in a tournament, just know what the deck is like and all the ins and outs of the deck. So even if you choose to play a whole different strategy and a whole different deck, you know what that deck does. You know the sequencing involved in that deck, and you can kind of read your opponent better. Kind of like I've been watching a lot of VGC content lately, and one of the big terms that they use is I'm making a correct read.
Yes.
They're guessing what their opponent's doing. And we can apply that same concept in the TCG based on your practice and your knowledge of sequencing in a certain deck. And if you know what your opponent's going to be doing, you can read what they're doing more accurately, and that can help you determine what you're going to do on your turn.
Absolutely. Like, so your turn is always going to be, it's a game of chess, right? So you're going to determine, you're going to do your actions based on what you're expecting your opponent to react to you, and then you have to react to their reaction. And it just turns into turn over turn is just a reaction game. But there's those points like we've heard in some decks being called checkmate decks, where you put yourself in a position through your sequencing where your opponent cannot out-sequence you. They're put in a spot of bad or bad. And you're like, okay, I'm either going to KO you with my active or my bench, and I got to win either way. Like, those moments always feel great, but those moments only happen when you sequence and tie your turns in order and do that turn over turn. Like, if you misplay, and misplaying is typically a missequencing. If you misplay, you're typically going out of order. You're typically missing a step. You're typically tripping over yourself. And it's not intentional by any means. Sometimes you just play too fast. And then you end up missequencing. And you're like, oh, I just made this misplay. And now you have to readjust the rest of your turn based on that. And you have to resequence the rest of the turn based on that one error. So it is all about setting yourself up. You're not going to be perfect every single game. You're not going to be perfect every single turn. But when you're able to get comfortable with your lines and get comfortable with your deck, and then over time you get comfortable with multiple decks, you'll be able to be like, all right, this is what this deck wants to do. This is how I'm going to set up my turn to prevent him from doing what he wants to do. or bait him into doing what he wants to do into my strategy, which some decks definitely do. It's like, all right, you can set up all you want. I'm just going to set up better.
Exactly. And I would say a good example is actually my round 3 at my challenge. I was going against my good friend. He was playing a Lost Box deck. I was playing Arceus Firebox. And towards the end of the game, I put him in a checkmate situation. There was no way for him to take 3 prize cards while I only had to take 1 prize card. I think I had to take 2. But I had a board set up to where, like, okay, you can knock out this Pokemon. I'm going to return doing this attack. Okay, you can knock out this, but I want to be able to use my Monkey Dory to knock out that Pokemon and then attack with this one. Like, whatever he did, it didn't matter. I had 3 different ways of getting game on board.
Yeah.
And he saw that, and obviously he played it out. And as soon as he did it, I promoted my Pokemon, and I'm like, boss, knockout game. But I was able to sequence my board because with the Arceus deck, yes, obviously it's a very linear beginning. You want to make sure you try to get 3 energy on your Arceus by turn 2, and that's fairly easy to do. But after that, you have to determine what is your best way on how to get the rest of the prizes without sacrificing a lot of your 2 prize Pokemon, especially against a deck like Lost Box that has a lot of different options, and they don't mind playing from behind, and they can OHKO you in 10,000 different ways. So to be able to put myself in that situation where I had enough energy in play to even sacrifice with the Delphox V, or I can do the Monkey Dory, use Adrenabrain, and I was just able to sequence my game in a way that was very advantageous for me to get the win, and made my opponent really kind of play around me.
Yeah.
Did I misplay? Absolutely. And I actually admitted that in the middle of my game to my opponent. I'm like, oh man, I should have done something else. Like I was trying to attack and I didn't have Magma Basin in play to get the fire energy onto my board so I can fire off to my Arceus. I thought I had all that done, and I did a whole turn based on that strategy, missing the main piece of my strategy.
Yeah.
So yeah, I still misplayed. I don't play Arceus decks that a lot anymore, but I was able to recover and figure out, okay, this is the misplay of that sequencing. Next turn, I need to do X, Y, and Z to make up that missing ground, and I was able to do that, and I was able to play off a turn that he did, and I was able to get ahead that way. So even though if you miss sequence in your game, don't be discouraged from that. You can actually use that to your advantage. Yes, you're making up a lot of ground, but it's not totally impossible to make up and actually get in the lead and put more pressure onto your opponent.
Yeah, and sometimes mis-sequencing can give you a new assessment. It's really a lot of assessing the board state after every individual move. In like obviously in timed CP level events, you're going to have to try to sequence efficiently on a time crunch. But in testing, if you're playing on live, like yes, there is a timer on live, but it's going to give you enough time to kind of be like, all right, I just did this. What's my next best move? I just did that. And you're going move by move instead of turn by turn. And if you can break down your turn into sections of movements, I think it's going to be easier to digest and get yourself to your end game and to your goal of, all right, what do I want to accomplish by this turn? Is it, do I want to set up? Is it, do I need to do a KO? Is it, do I need to set up damage onto the board? If you kind of identify what your small goals are and get those little mini sections of packs of actions together, I think you're going to be able to sequence efficiently without making it seem like you're getting overwhelmed with decisions.
Exactly. And I think it's time to let's go over a deck that sequencing is very important in. And
Yeah.
I can't think of a better deck to talk about than a rogue deck of the week.
Yeah, and I find, and you mentioned it, right? So you play tested this deck on that Friday play testing stream, and when you were play testing that deck, I was in the chat being like, "You are doing it wrong."
Yeah.
I was so adamant on how you needed to do your movements, and Joe was looking over the chat, and he's like, "Dean, don't listen to Devin. Don't look at chat right now. Don't look at chat," because he's seeing what you're doing because obviously you're showing the hand. You're kind of saying, "Hey, this is what I'm kind of grappling with," and I'm seeing that same information, being like, "You do this, you do this, you do this, you do this." Like I'm outlining the steps, and you look back and be like, "Yeah, I should have done those steps, shouldn't I?"
Turns out I won that match anyway, and my top deck, I didn't have anything, so it didn't matter when I attached the energy, because he wasn't attacking me that turn anyway.
Yeah,
So, but yes, so the deck we're talking about is Lycanroc, not Lycanroc EX, not Lycanroc V, regular old Lycanroc that came out with the Journey Together set. So,
yeah,
Devin, tell us what this card does.
yeah. So let me get the actual text because it has changed with the Journey Together, um, with the Journey Together release in the English. So I'll summarize it, but it is a deck that the whole point of the deck is single prize because Lycanroc is a stage 120 HP fighting type Pokemon that evolves from regular Rockruff, and it has the ability and it has an attack that are synergistic with one another. And they're both synergistic with a new energy card called Spiky Energy. So Spiky
Which
Energy, it came out with the Journey Together set. It actually came out in Japan with this Lycanroc deck, but with us
mhm.
getting it in the way we are getting it together. So the way the Spiky Energy reads is as long as this card is attached to a Pokemon, it provides a colorless energy. If the Pokemon this card is attached to is in the active spot and is damaged by an attack from your opponent's Pokemon, even if the Pokemon is knocked out, you put 2 damage counters on the attacking Pokemon. So the reason why that is significant is because Lycanroc's ability is called Spike Clad. When you play this Pokemon from your hand to evolve one of your Pokemon during your turn, you may attach up to 2 spiky energy cards from your discard pile to this Pokemon. So it wants spiky energy in the discard. You need to evolve it, but you want to make sure you evolve it after a certain set of order of operations. We'll talk about that in a little bit. And then the attack is again synergistic with what spiky energy likes to do, which is put damage counters as a reactatory move. So Lycanroc has an attack for 3 colorless energy. Clamping Fangs is 40 base damage, and then does 40 more damage for each damage counter on your opponent's active Pokemon. So in the deck, you are trying to stream Lycanroc's turn over turn over turn in order to do damage based on the spiky energy stacking from the previous turn. And it's one of those situations where I do fully believe that the sequencing matters because the first thing you want to value is getting the spiky energy into the discard pile, and then the second thing you want to do is then evolve the Lycanroc. And you have to make sure that there's the energy in the discard pile in order to maximize Rockruff's ability to maximize its damage output.
Yeah, I would say a good way to summarize this deck is a little bit of a combination of the Archaludon's ability to where you can accelerate the energy from this card to an Archaludon is any metal Pokemon. In this case, is to the one specific, like the Lycanroc. But then it's also reminding me of that Scovillain EX deck that we talked about a couple months ago on this channel, where the attack is based on how much damage is on board. In this case, is on your opponents instead on yourself. But you're playing that dance of like, okay, how can I reserve my energy and sequence my actions to put damage onto my opponent's active Pokemon, but also evolve my Pokemon at the proper time so I can take advantage of the damage on the opponent's active.
Yes.
And as you talked about, the order of operations is very important when we get to your turn because, like you said, if we don't have the energy in the discard pile, it's very hard to put 3 energy on the Lycanroc.
Yes.
There's only one other way we do that, and it's with reversal energy. But even then, like, if they attack into you, they're not getting the damage needed for the follow-up attack.
Yeah.
So I believe this is a very good deck to to showcase the importance of sequencing in a turn. And you were yelling at me. It's like, why did he not do this? Why did he not do that? And I played more and more games on live afterwards. And I got to the point where, okay, I understand the strategy of this deck and how I can take the advantage of what I want to do and make my opponent work and think and use resources.
Yeah, and the two pieces of this deck I want to emphasize outside of the Lycanroc attack strategy is you want to live out of your discard pile because you're accelerating your energy from the discard pile, but you also want to be able to recycle your Lycanrocs and recycle your Rockruffs as efficiently as possible. But also keep in mind that you don't always have to attack with the Rockruff and the Lycanroc. You don't always have to promote those up. You do have partner Pokemon. You have the Maractus from Journey Together, where if it gets knocked out, it puts 6 damage counters onto the active. Sometimes you want to go behind in the prize trade, because this is almost an exclusively single prize attacking deck, to where you can give up a couple of KOs here and there while going back and forth and going blow before blow. This deck really does feast on an EX format. It does not do very well against other single prizers in terms of the way we have it built right now. Now, I'm very much still in the testing phase and the figuring out how it kind of fits in the meta phase. And since recording this week's video, we've already made adjustments because of how I felt with the initial list. But I had to start. You have to start with an initial list in order to find those adjustments. And
yeah, I know. Just today, right before we recorded, I adjusted a list again based on the conversation you and me had on our way home from our jobs. Based on how you played it and I played it, we felt like the list that I played on Friday, yes, it was fine, but we felt like we can optimize it in a way that matched our play styles. For example, I added the boss's orders like right away for some reason it didn't play any boss. The initial list that I played on Friday was really relying on you being behind the prize trade and playing the counter catcher, which sometimes you can't. It doesn't work like that. If you, especially if you're a single prize deck and going against a multi prize format, you're going to get ahead eventually because you're going to take one more prize card than what they're taking every turn.
Yeah.
So I put it in the boss as one adjustment, and there was some other text that you and me talked about as well.
Yeah, and we're not going to show the updated list in the video. I'm going to go put the old list in the video for this week's Rogue Deck of the Week and the deck showcase video of the week. So definitely keep an eye on that. This is a deck that I've been kind of theory crafting for almost 3 months now, actually. So I'm excited we have physically got our cans on the cards and we were able to test. And hopefully this is a deck that we'll be able to craft and play around with, where it really can become a good deck that we could rely on if we ever needed. Like if I wanted to go to a tournament, I might be like, hey, can I have the Lycanroc list? Or you would take it to challenges and cups because it's something you can just have in your back pocket. That's the goal of the deck. It's a pet deck. It's a deck that I want to hopefully see you do well. But if it just doesn't position itself right, then so be it.
I would even say when we were playing on stream, Joe was like, "This is actually a very interesting deck. Like I can see people do well at the local level with this, and it obviously if someone brings this to a regional and does well, we're going to be more than excited for that.
Yeah.
But it really catches people off guard. If you're going against I will say it struggles, like you said, in a single deck format. But I feel like it also struggles in a format where there's a lot of sniping potential, which unfortunately Journey Together has that because we have no bench barrier other than the Terra mechanic.
Yeah, and it really is going to be it's going to be position dependent on how the meta shifts. And right now, at the time of recording and the time of testing, we just don't know what the meta is going to be. Like we have an idea. There's popular decks. There's decks we've seen well in Japan. We just have no idea how it's going to shake out. And Atlanta is going to be our first really good sampling of how did the players react to this new data.
Exactly, but I love playing the deck. I play games all on the live stream and outside of the live stream with it. I think it's very fun when you flip over that card and you start with a Rockruff. I can tell that my opponent had no idea what I was doing until actually got set up and like, oh, this is what you're doing, and they're like trying to figure out how to play around me. So that was really fun to see. I know I want to build this in real life and bring this to a couple challenges if I can. I just need to order the cards since I didn't really get a lot of product, but we'll have the video of the Lycanroc deck on the YouTube channel on Friday at noon. So stay tuned for that. Please watch it. Let us know your thoughts. Let us know how you would optimize the list. And also let us know what other decks you want us to see. We're going into a whole new format with a whole new list of archetypes we want to test out. So let us know what decks you want to see. Put that in the comment of this video, and we'll take a look at it, see if we can create something. But yeah, I'm excited for Journey Together. It's a nice breath of fresh air. A lot of people have been saying that the prismatic evolutions got a little stale at the end. So I'm glad that it's something new, and I know a lot of people are getting excited to play the game again.
Yeah. No, it's a really good time to do it. With rotation, with a new set, this is the perfect time to jump into it if you've taken any time away from it.
Exactly. So with that, Devin, you have anything to add to this week's episode?
No, I think it was really fun seeing you guys play test a new set. Really, like on top of just the Lycanroc deck, I'm excited to see it finally in action. And then hopefully over the next couple weeks, we will talk about different ways of executing and playing through decks and trying to get better and trying to become better trainers. So that way we can just enjoy going to events and going to tournaments more and just getting to enjoy it. Because let's be honest, it's always better when you're winning.
Yeah, exactly. So thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Rogue Deck Chronicles. Please like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Let us know your thoughts on this episode. We're trying to build the channel up, so if you can, please tell your friends all about us, and let us know what ideas you have for us to do. We're open to suggestions, like doing more live streams. Maybe we can do some more live play with me and Devin. Maybe some conquest stuff with me and Joe, or me and someone in my play testing group. But yeah, we're just excited to bring you content and see how rogue decks play a part in the Journey Together post rotation format. So we'll see what the next couple weeks brings us. But until then, have fun playing those sneaky decks, y'all.
Bye, guys.